Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
And welcome to the next episode of the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, researcher, professor, and big fan of Educators Everywhere. And with me is my charming co-host,
Laura Estes-Swilly. I am a teacher and a writer and also a lover of educators everywhere, including like the ones right in my building and sometimes right in my mirror.
Oh, I love that. Teachers got to give themselves a little love too.
Yes. Oh, totally. We need to, especially right now. It's that end of the year, which should feel easy, but for some reason it feels hard. And like it's that downhill slide, but somehow you're trudging uphill both ways, like our parents when they were walking to school back in the day. So yes, we have to work on all the padding of our own backs right now.
Yeah, it does feel frantic at the end of the year, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like you're counting down the days, but the days are so packed and you're trying to get everything in. And it should be a fun time to sort of cherish these last days with your kiddos, but it is so stressful. It's like a constant checklist and you check one thing off and something else gets added.
Yes, and it's testing season across the board for all grades. And then in a high school, it's just huge. There's so many events and there are so many things that we need to do and participate in and be there that it gets to be a snowball.
Mm-hmm. I remember as a second grade teacher kind of wishing that instead of ending the year with all the celebrations and all the events and all the things, like just wanting the last day of school to be a time of sort of quiet reflection with kids, where we could really talk about how far we've come and just enjoy each other in a peaceful way for a while, but it was always manic.
Right. It's like that last time as a whole family. And it would be so nice to have it. And in high school, we really don't have it because then exams happen. You don't have a regular class for a week. And I teach seniors all day long and they are hit or miss those last couple of weeks, whether they're taking AP tests or they're just not coming because they have the days and they might as well use them. So we don't get that closure that we need so badly.
Oh, I used to like just carve out a little bit of time to do two things. So I, on the first day of school, always read this book called Don't Eat the Teacher because it's about sort of rules and acclimating to school about this little baby shark. And they loved that book because it was him sort of learning what you can and shouldn't do at school. And I would save that book and read it again on the last day of school. And then I would pull out all their writing they did on the first day of school and let them read it again. And they would say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I couldn't spell that. Or I can't believe my handwriting looked like that. So we would carve out like just a little hour for just us before all the crazy began on the last day to say like, look guys, remember when you were brand new with me and look at all the things we've done. So you have to find that little bit of time just for that.
Yeah, that's precious. I just love that. I just love that. Love it.
I need to figure out how to do that with grad students.
Yeah.
Like there has to be some kind of little reflection they could do on the first day of class and then we could pull it back out on the last day. That's such a powerful reflection opportunity for any age, any level.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you don't realize how much you've grown unless you have some kind of yardstick like that.
Yep. You do. You have to measure the height on the wall in the utility room or the garage. You have to go back to your original writing. I used to do that in creative writing. Okay, pull out your first journal from this year. let's flip back. Let's look at what we were doing. And they would write a reflection, how they've grown and how they've changed and what new things did they try that really, really worked. And what new things did they try that didn't work and weren't for them. And that was really important to them as writers.
Yeah. It's important for us as people, isn't it?
Yes.
To think what I thought a year ago or what I thought 10 months ago, how has that changed? I love that.
Yeah. So you're inspiring me. I am about a month from now having major surgery on my foot, and I will be 10 weeks non-weight bearing, and I'm scared to death, right? Of how am I going to be me? How am I going to do my things? And we're kind of figuring out all the accommodations I'm going to need in my house and who's going to help with this, that, and the other thing. And I need to reflect on that before I start. And then I need to reflect on that at the end. And I bet I will have learned a lot.
It's forced rest and forced reflection, sort of like we all had during COVID.
Right.
It was forced introspection because we were stuck.
Right. And I will be stuck. I'm not going anywhere. I can't walk. And you know me, as we discovered last week on episode 7, not much of an athlete. So crutches are a little scary in my hands. So it's not like I'm going to be crutching around going out to dinner.
Mm. Well, we'll be Zooming and podcasting.
Yes.
And all the things. So we will give you some opportunities to think and reflect and connect. And I know you picked the story we have for this episode because this is a story that you have liked, I think, since it came into the collection.
Yes.
And was part of the Safe, Seen, and Stretched in the Classroom book.
Yes.
It's a story from Jordan about her 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Arbor, and it's a memory from a parent-teacher conference.
Right. This is actually probably the story that inspired me so much on probably my 3rd read of the book when I was standing at my duty every morning reading through it. And I think this is the one that inspired me to say to you, you need to do something more and maybe a little different with these stories so we can reach more people and share more stories. And then Lessons That Last was born from that first conversation. And I think this is the one that like really inspired me.
And I've always loved this story, but I don't know that I thought as deeply about it as you have. And when I went back to read it as we prepared for this episode, I started thinking about parent-teacher conferences. And as a former teacher and former principal, I know that that is a stress-inducing thing for teachers. So I'm wondering, why do you think parent-teacher conferences are so stressful?
Well, I think it's so different in secondary than in primary. I will say that. I don't remember ever being terribly stressed about conference night coming. But then, that's how I am. I take what comes and I deal with it when it walks in the door. And I think that's probably one of the things that has kept me sanely in the classroom for so long. But that has to be what makes it stressful, is we don't know what's coming. And even in primary grades where you have a schedule, which is brilliant. If we could do that, if someone could figure out how to schedule conferences for secondary, I would be all for it. But even with the schedules, you sometimes don't know what's coming, and other times you do know what's coming because you've dealt with certain parents and certain problems, and now it's coming maybe with a different force in person. And then for us, it's who's coming, how are they coming, what's going to happen while they're in my room, and how am I going to juggle the people standing outside the door who are waiting to get in.
Oh, I see. As a former kindergarten teacher, I had to sign up. So back then it was, you sent in a little half sheet. Now it totally would be a Google form or some Calendly, some better way of signing up. But I knew who was scheduled to come and when. But as a kindergarten teacher, the hard part was I was sometimes the first person to say, your
Yes.
child is wonderful, but not perfect,
Yes. Yeah.
and struggling in some areas, and had to try to find a way to say to them, this is the fact that your child is struggling in some areas is normal, and it is no way a reflection on the kind of parent you are.
Right. Right. So I can see that totally.
Yeah.
That would have to be hard. I more deal with parents who are angry with their children. They don't come to senior. First conference night is different. First conference night is 4 weeks into the school year. And with 160 students, my big concern is remembering their name and what period they're in when they walk in the room, right? Oh, I know I see you every day. Where am I supposed to find you in the computer so I can talk about your grades intelligently? But beyond that, most of the parents who show up are either coming to have accolades poured on their children, and they know, and so we do, or they're coming because there's a struggle, and they're coming in angry, not with me, but with the student. And it's very easy for me in those moments to 100% always align myself with the student. I'm not joining a pile, right? I'm going to be on the kid's side, because pretty much I'm always on the kid's side. You might need a little correction now and then, but I'm on your side. So that's one of the challenges, I think, for us, definitely.
And I've only seen high school conference night from a parent perspective. And I always went to conference night with, I think about my oldest, Connor, who always had good grades because academics was a strength for him. I'm not going to say it was his dedication. He just had a natural inclination for learning, and he was a really good test taker, and he knew what he needed to do well. So we would come to conference night. And it was interesting, like the perspective of some teachers is, why are you here?
Right.
Like, he's fine. And then some of them would quickly sit down, pull up his grades, and just go over his grades on the computer, which I was already very familiar with because I tracked his grades.
Right.
And then some of them, I think about Mrs. Carter, who was his Latin teacher, that was a challenging class, but he loved her. And the minute he walked in, she was Connor and talked all about him. And I knew that she knew him.
Yes.
And loved him. And so that's what I really wanted as a parent, was like, tell me about this side of my child that I don't get to see.
Right.
Is he respectful? Is he kind? Is he a collaborator? How does he work with others? How does he respond to feedback from you? Like, that's what I, as a parent, I think for him, really wanted to know. And she could tell me all of that about him.
Right. That's lovely. I don't get a lot of that. At the point parents are coming to me with graduation is a risk. Yes. Graduation is on the line. They're worried, and that worry comes out in anger. And if you have a kid who's failing English in 12th grade and really in jeopardy of not graduating, of course you're angry. Of course you're worried. Of course you're scared.
Don't you think anger most of the time is just a cover for fear?
A lot of the time. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we don't know the battles that they're going through at home. Mm-hmm. There's so much we don't know. I love the opportunity, just like Mrs. Carter, to say wonderful things about kids. And I really have always loved the opportunity to say wonderful things about kids to parents who are not happy with their kids. Right? That's just what you're going to get from me. I'm going to tell you the great and wonderful side of your student. And I'm going to tell you they absolutely can do this. I don't know the barriers that are stopping them. You, Mom, know better than I do. But we have a staff here to help you. What do you need from us? That's usually my point of view. But a lot like the story we're going to hear, I love to be able to say wonderful things about kids. I say it to them, I say it about them to other teachers, and I say it to their parents anytime I get a chance.
Mm.
And isn't that what conference night is for? Because by the time they get to me, now it's probably different in a fourth grade conference night, but by the time they get to me, the ones who won't stop talking or distract the class with their silliness, those parents aren't coming. They already know that about those kids. They've been doing it now for 10, 12 years. And so they're not coming to find that out. I think that probably, in my perspective, there are harder conversations in the early years of conference nights.
Maybe so. We're not worried yet in the early years about, is my kid going to graduate or
Right.
get into college or some of those things. Although third grade, they're worried in Florida, where we both teach, about mandatory retention if you don't pass the state test. That's probably a whole nother hard conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But other than that, so much about conference night and so much about teaching is our perspective on it as teachers and the purpose we find in it. And I remember as an intern, so a student teacher, interning in third grade for Sally Berg, who was a very experienced, wonderful teacher, and being there with her on conference night. And she turned to me and said, "We are so privileged to be part of kids' lives and families' lives. And this is just one of those opportunities to be a part of that." And I thought, what a great perspective. Like, this is a privilege.
Yes. What a frame that you now have conference night for the rest of your career.
Absolutely. Like, I think from that moment on, that was my perspective on conference night. Like, this is how I am a part of a family's life.
Yes.
Like, it's not just this kid who I interact with. This has an impact on a family. And so what is my role as a partner now with these parents in developing this little human? And that came from Sally.
I love that. And I actually had that opportunity and am like continuing with a family because they have multiple kids. Last year, I had a young man, he transferred into my school. Hard to do your senior year. His family moved from like North Tampa to Valrico, which is, anyone who isn't from here, that's a systemic shift. Let's be clear.
Yep.
And he was in my second period, but couldn't make it to school on time, was very sort of in another place, lots of absences, lots of riding the DF line. And so his mother came in on conference night, and I didn't know this, but they run a restaurant, a Middle Eastern restaurant. And so she came in and in traditional clothing and brings me a styrofoam container. And she said, "Oh, I made these fresh for you." And I looked at it, nothing I've ever seen before, had no idea what it was. She said, "I want you to try it right now," which is scary. And I tried it. And I've since taken my family to their restaurant probably 10, 15 times, but it's not a flavor I have ever tasted before. Don't really know what's in it. Amazing. And that was how we bonded. She cooked for me. And then we stressed and worried and worked together over her son and finally got him graduated. And then here came the next one this year. And so he'll say to me, "My mom is asking where you are. When are you coming?" Because I feel a little bit, especially for this family that just moved here, like a part of the fabric of their new community. And that's really cool.
Oh, I mean, it is true though, when you have multiple kids from the same family, you really are part of the family.
Yes.
And they see you interacting with the different needs and personalities There's different siblings, much like you did with the Hassan siblings,
Yep.
who could not be more different,
No.
but both loved being in your class. So, on that note, Laura, will you share Jordan's story about conference night with Mrs. Arbor?
Okay, I will try. I am the youngest of 4 children. Growing up, my sister was a gifted pianist, and both of my brothers excelled in sports. I was quiet and preferred reading to performing on a stage or field. At home, I always felt left out and left behind. Mrs. Arbor's class was the one place I felt special. Mrs. Arbor loved the same books I did, and we would sit and talk about the characters and themes. She often recommended new titles she thought I would enjoy. On conference night, I sat between Mrs. Arbor and my parents, prepared for the usual explanation of test scores and grades. Instead, Mrs. Arbor pulled out a folder full of my written responses to the books I read. She told my parents that I was very insightful for my age. She pointed out my choice of words and phrases and complimented my ability to express my thoughts in writing. When the conference was over, I practically floated out of the room. Mrs. Arbor took every opportunity to highlight my strengths in notes and phone calls to my parents. She didn't see my introverted nature as a disadvantage. She saw it as a gift. Her compliments facilitated the one thing I craved most, praise from my parents. Like most quiet kids, I was easily overlooked in a group, but Mrs. Arbor made the effort to see me.
Oh, Mrs. Arbor.
Isn't she special?
She really is. And she highlights this really important idea that it's not just what we say to kids, it's what we say about them, especially when they're close enough to hear.
Right.
And that's such a great strategy. It made me think of Bev Sacco, who was an amazing second grade teacher. She had Connor, and then she retired right before Caitlin got to second grade. But she would, I remember her like dropping her class off at like the music class for their specials. And she would say to the music teacher loud enough for them to hear, "This is such a great group. They've had a great morning. You're really going to enjoy them today."
Oh, that's awesome.
They heard that, so they were going to live up to that. You know, they weren't going to disappoint Mrs. Sacco.
No.
So I think that about this story, too. She wasn't going to disappoint Mrs. Arbor. She was going to live up to those compliments and that praise.
And she didn't have to stretch to live up to it because it was honest, right? It was very, very authentic, and it acknowledged to her, my teacher sees me, understands me, and knows me. And I think that is exactly what she was craving. So obviously it fed that in her heart that she really needed that.
She did. And it's such a good, you know, it's in the Safe, Seen, and Stretched book for a reason, because it's such a good demonstration of how to help kids feel seen. And we talked a couple of episodes before about performers, you know, kids who are not introverted, not shy.
Right.
And how we help them feel seen by recognizing those gifts. And when you're a quiet kid, an introverted kid, it's easy to feel invisible.
You float into the room, you take your seat, you do everything just right, and then you float back out. I actually work really hard to remind myself to connect with the kids who are really kind of trying not to be seen, not because they don't want me to see them. I just think they just don't want to be seen because they don't want to compete with the louder voices, and it's their nature. They're just a little more introverted. So I really keep my eye on those kids because it's easy when you're dealing with everything else. Something has to go, and it's easy to drop that kid. And I try to remind myself that kid is you. right? The quiet
Mhm.
girl in the classroom or the quiet boy in the classroom who has so much to offer. We will never know until I connect.
And there's so many strengths to being introverted. The students I've had who are introverts, and probably me as well, are really good observers. Like they know everything
Yes.
that's going on, and they know and can predict sort of their classmates, and they understand people in a way, even though they don't interact quite in the same way as some of their extroverted peers. They are watching and thinking.
You are so right. Some of the most touching letters I've gotten at the end of the year, because seniors write letters to their teachers at the end of the year. It's such a closing time for them that they're more reflective than they are probably in this 6 years previous. I will get letters from kids who are very quiet, who are observing about what they observed in me. And they're always so insightful. You care about every student in your classroom. You want us all to be successful. And I'm like, how do they know that? Because they're watching and they're listening and they're taking note of everything. That I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. And they live inside their heads, instead of out loud, which makes them, so many of them, like Jordan, good writers.
Yes.
Because
and
they're
great readers.
Yes. They're always thinking and reflecting and trying to figure out how things go together and why people do what they do and all of that. So how did this story, which you have loved for so long, change the way you approach kids or the way you approach parents?
I think that's a big question. I thought a lot about this story over the last couple of days, knowing we were going to be talking about it. And this is one of those stories that I kind of keep tucked in my heart because it reminds me to check in and know the kids who are easy to miss. Especially in a class of, I think my biggest class is 32. It could be easy to miss somebody in that classroom, and I can't let that happen. And so it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of conscious work. And so Jordan reminds me that I need to make those connections, and I need to talk to them about the things they really like and are interested in, because there's a lot I don't know. The other kids are telling me all the time what they like and all the time what they're interested in, but these are little secret pieces that I have to get to know. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing I take from this is the importance of talking about a student in a positive way, and even in an unexpectedly positive way. She was not expecting that. She knew she had that relationship. She knew that this teacher respected her mind and her ability as a reader, but she didn't know she was going to talk about it. And so that unexpected burst of appreciation and notice really makes a difference.
And I think about that. I think for me, this story probably brings up different emotions because I have an older brother who is 361 days older and was academically very gifted. I don't remember him ever learning to read, but he could read by the time he went to kindergarten. He would read the directions to the class and all of that. Athletically incredibly gifted. So when my mom signed us up for, I think we took acrobatics or something and I think she signed us both up because I was scared to go. Super introverted me, super extroverted him. We talked to everybody. And I think by spring, he was like doing a solo in the recital, like just doing all the flips and all the things. So everyone knew him, everyone admired him, all the way through elementary school. I would be Mike's sister and never quite as shiny, as him. So I could relate to this story as I was a really hard worker, and I had to be, as a dyslexic kid who really had to struggle to live up to expectations, had a work ethic that he didn't necessarily develop because he didn't have to. Things came super easy. So at least through elementary and probably part of middle school, he was just light years ahead of me in every way. In high school, I think we went sort of in such different paths. And I think in high school, as things got harder, my work ethic paid off. Yes. And so we were a little different then. But growing up, certainly in elementary, I was his little sister always. So I could relate to this story in that way. And the teachers who didn't make any assumptions about me and who looked for my strengths really made a difference for me. And there were some great ones. Certainly at Sefner, Mrs. Miller, we talked about a few episodes ago, had both of us, and I think tried really hard to see us as unique kids.
Yeah. My mother has talked about that. She has a younger brother and he followed her, gifted, hardworking, a winner all the time. And that's super common. I try so hard not to expect anything from a kid just because their sibling did it. The only reason I'm excited to see a sibling is because it's like I know somebody in the room. I love it when I get a third because I've had a lot of trios where I've taught all three. And when the youngest one comes in, it's always a wild card. You don't know what's coming with that youngest kid of 3. And I love it. They're so themselves. They're not really competing with anyone by the time the third baby comes. So I love those trio kids. I wanted to mention in this story, one of the things that Jordan said really struck me was that the introverted kid is at a disadvantage, right? Because they're not noticed and there's an effort. And we just talked about that. Mrs. Arbor made the effort to see her gifts. The same thing happens to extroverted students. The performers are just performers. Right. To a lot of teachers. It takes a special teacher with us as well to zoom in and find our gifts and celebrate our gifts. And instead of saying, well, she's a leader, she's talkative, she's willing to perform all the time. Wow, she's a great writer. I'm really impressed by some of her whatever, or some of his whatever. I would have loved my mom to hear those things at a conference night rather than, my talkative nature.
Rather than how much homework you're doing or not doing
Right.
I mean, it really speaks to going beneath the surface and looking a little more deeply at our kids and understanding that no one is just one thing.
Right.
We're all, even kids, complex, and we can't look at one characteristic and make assumptions. We need to go a little deeper and look a little harder and find those places where all of our kids shine.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think is the most important thing that happens in the classroom. And right now, I don't know across the country, but right now there's this constant push to teach bell to bell, always bell to bell, bell to bell. There's not time.
Maximize the instructional minutes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Rigorous, maximize, bell to bell.
I thought you were going to say rigorous, maximize. I was going to put that on a banner in someone's classroom.
We'd get a t-shirt, rigorous, maximus.
Carve it in the marble. Yeah.
So when you do that, this is what you miss. You miss the conversations. Yeah. You miss hey, that was really interesting. Could you want to write a poem about that? I would love to read a poem about that. Or I see you're interested in that thing. You want to do some research tonight and share it with us tomorrow? if we're teaching bell to bell and we're focused only on curriculum rather than on people, we're missing so much and so much that matters.
Yes. And just sort of giving them time and space to talk to you, to talk to each other. And sometimes the quiet kids are really funny.
Yes,
and you
they
wouldn't
are.
know that unless you happen to be nearby,
Yes.
because they're watching, and some of them are really smart and watching, and the things that they connect and say are just funny.
I know that. I learned that early because I sat next to my best friend in a class who was constantly whispering things in my ear. So I know it's just a matter of drawing it out or creating the relationship where they're willing to share that humor with you and share that insight and those razor wits. And if you're only looking at book pages and theorems and grammatical structure, then you're not finding any of that. And we're leaving so much behind.
The grade book does not represent the complex kid sitting in front of you.
Right.
Well, I love that you picked this story for this episode. I think it's a great one as parent conferences are coming at this wrap-up end of the year time, and as we're reflecting on the students who are leaving us and starting to prepare our hearts and minds for summer and the ones who will be coming next.
Yeah.
Thank you for choosing this one for this episode. Thank you for being the teacher for both Hassan siblings, who certainly made an impact on kids and families. And thank you, teachers everywhere, for all that you do to notice and to affirm the strength of your students. We don't deserve you, but I'm so glad we have you. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Lessons That Last podcast. The story Laura shared today can be found on the Chalk and Chances website, along with many more stories and resources. Just visit chalkandchances.com. You can even take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. See you next Sunday for another episode of Lessons That Last.